And welcome to a new episode of the Zero Technique Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Stern. You can follow me on Twitter at rstern33. We are produced, as always, by www.backsportspage.com. Follow them on Twitter at backsportspage. Go to facebook.com/backsportspage. And at backsportspage on pretty much any social media site around. I want to welcome in my two co-hosts for tonight, part of the Zero Technique team. We got Jared Zero and Nate Angus. How you doing tonight, guys?
I'm doing pretty well, Ryan. Thank you for asking.
I'm doing well as well myself, Ryan. Thank you for having us on tonight. I look forward to another great episode.
Yeah. So obviously we got to cut right to the chase. We're living in a world that none of us could have expected. And the events over the past little more than a week have really started to almost define a generation. Starting off with the senseless murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. It's taken me a lot of time to digest my feelings about everything that's going on. And I stand on multiple sides of these fences. And I mean, the first side and the first stand that you have to take, or at least that I have to take, is with the family of George Floyd, with anyone who's affected by the senseless murder, not just with him, but all of the other senseless murders that have been happening at the hands of police who that are just going rogue. On the other hand, I am a supporter of the police. I have friends, I have family who are members of different police units. And I know from personal experience that 99.99% of police that are out there are good cops. And unfortunately, and I know that it seems to take one rotten apple to spoil the bunch. But we do have to ultimately look at that the far majority of the police in this country are looking out for all citizens, not just white, not just black, not just whatever race they are, not just Hispanic. Again, but it doesn't mean that it's sensible for what happened to happen. And as much as I believe the protests were meant to be silent, or not silent, but nonviolent. That's the word that I think we have to understand. The idea behind a lot of these protests were that they were going to be nonviolent because they were sick and tired of what's been happened to them. And unfortunately, now things have gotten to the point where we have seen a lot of these protests become violent. And as great as the sentiment is behind some of them, we can't let all of the violence just erupt. I know I have a lot more to say. Jared, I'll pass it on to you. I know that this past week has definitely been rough on you. Why don't you go into a little bit of what you've been experiencing?
So for me, it's a little bit different. As a young teenager, I grew up in maybe not the best situation that a lot of kids from where I was from had. A lot of kids where I was from, they were in rich white kids, or they were much better off than I was. We'll put it that way. And when I was a young teenager, I had my hobbies just like anybody else, and I was going to, a local game store that was a couple cities over from where I lived, and every single one of my friends that I made who welcomed me with open arms, they were all black. And I have so much love for every single person I've ever met in that community that it almost feels like a responsibility for me to fight alongside of them. And to your point, Ryan, I do want to say, while I don't necessarily agree with the rioting, I do have to acknowledge that I understand it. I understand why it's happening.
Yeah.
And, and the other thing that I'm not saying you're saying this, but I have seen this argument used to kind of undermine the protests, and people are saying, well, the rioters are diminishing the meaning behind the protests, but then they turn around on the same foot and say, but not all bad cops define all cops. Well, you can't use that argument on one hand but not the other. And so for me,
I get it.
So for me, I actually attended a protest yesterday, and it was very peaceful. It was actually led by the mayor of the town that I was in, and it got the message across. And so for me, it's just I'm very much on the side of the protests.
If you were to ask me if I had to pick a side in this, obviously I'm picking the side of the protesters, because there's a reason why these protests are getting to the point that they're getting to, and that's because they've tried to do the silent, they've tried to do the nonviolent protests in the past, and it obviously still hasn't gotten them anywhere. And it's so tough for me because I try to put myself into their shoes, and I just can't. I have spent my 37 and a half years on this planet as a white male who has never been judged negatively because of the color of my skin. I could never fathom what the African American community is going through. And as much as I want to spin things in a positive way on both sides, I know it does make me look like a hypocrite, but there still is a way to hope for, and it's mainly because I'm trying to promote peace on both sides. I know we're far from that. We're still at the beginning, which is the craziest thing, because it's been so many years that this has been going on, and it still feels like we're at the beginning of it all. Nate, why don't you take us through some of your thoughts of what's been going on?
Yeah, so for me, the thing is that I am obviously for the Black Lives Matter movement. I do not think that what happened to George Floyd should happen to anybody, regardless of whether they're white, whether they're black, whether they're an Indian American, Asian American, Hispanic, or any other race that may be living in the United States. I don't think that it's okay for police brutality to occur in any circumstance. I don't think that any of what happened is okay. That being said, I'm also more with you, Ryan, where I would like to see these protests get to a state of nonviolence. I don't think that the rioting is necessarily the solution, but also to Jared's point, I understand why it's happening. And the other thing that I'd like to address is the situation with the looting that's occurring, where people are breaking and entering into small businesses and large retail stores and just simply taking stuff, which is the idea behind looting. And I don't think that that's a solution either. First of all, the retail stores didn't do anything in this. The small business owners and the retail stores are not at fault here. So I don't really see the relevance to the looting behind the Black Lives Matter movement. I do see more so where the riots come from, but I really don't think the looting has any place in all of this. And the rioting, I would love to see it get to a place of nonviolence. That being said, it's a tough situation because they have tried some peaceful protests. Look as recently as the Colin Kaepernick protest. That is the most used example when people say that the peaceful protest did not work. On the other foot, though, some of the most successful civil rights protesters of all time have been large-scale advocates of peaceful protest. The two that clearly come to mind are Mahatma Gandhi, who ended apartheid in Africa, and Martin Luther King, who the late great Martin Luther King Jr., who was at the forefront of the civil rights movement in the 1960s in the United States. Both of those people and all of their followers, like the Rosa Parks and the Malcolm X's of the world, were very large-scale advocates for peaceful protest. So to say that peaceful protesting has never worked is not a fair statement, because peaceful protesting has worked in a lot of situations. Will it work this time? Maybe not. But I would like to see these protests at least get to a state of semi-nonviolence or complete nonviolence before it's all said and done.
Now, back to your point, Nate, I did want to say one thing. So you did bring up the looting, and that, is, I'm sure everybody feels this way. Obviously, the looting is unnecessary. But again, you will, in any sort of movement or any sort of situation that we do have on hand, you are always going to have those, like Ryan said, those bad apples in the bunch that kind of spoil it for the rest of everybody. And no matter who it is, why it is, where it is, you are going to get those people that, will take advantage of a situation. And so the one thing I want to add, that I want to say kind of to everybody, is you can't let the looting and the rioting distract you from the matters at hand. I saw a post on Twitter, and if I could shout out the person, if I remembered their Twitter handle, I would. But the tweet said something along the lines of, people are saying, oh no, it's bad that George Floyd lost his life, but these rioting and looting has to stop. Try flipping that. Yeah, it sucks about the rioting and the looting, but the senseless killing of African Americans at the hands of the police has to stop. If you flip it, you're still able to acknowledge both issues, but you are able to prioritize the one that is more important.
Yeah,
and here's the thing, is that there are certain what you guys have both said about the couple bad apples ruining the whole bunch is absolutely true, and that's true of any situation. But there are certain things in certain things in this world where you can't afford to have bad apples. Being a police officer, that's not a profession that can afford to have bad apples. Being a protester is also not something that can afford to have bad apples. There are certain things that it's okay to have bad apples. If you have a couple, bad fast food servicemen out of the bunch, we'll probably be okay. We'll probably function okay as a society. If we have a couple bad surgeons, a couple bad pilots, a couple bad police officers, people die. If we have a couple bad protesters, people die. And that's just where I would like to see that you're right, Jared. You're going to have the bad apples out of the bunch, but there are certain things that just can't afford to have bad apples.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, and one thing that I did want to note for anyone who is watching live, if you want to make a comment, if you want to have your voice heard, just whether you're watching on Facebook, if you're watching on YouTube, we do stream our podcasts live on those two platforms. We stream live on the Backsports page, Facebook and YouTube account, so make sure that you are subscribed to both of those. But if you want to leave a comment, we can definitely discuss those comments on the air live. So we would love to interact with our listeners. But this is a football podcast, and we've already now seen a lot of different news come out of the NFL regarding this situation that's going on. And the one that I think that we should start with, only because it's the newest to us doing this recording, is the everything that's going on with the Drew Brees comments in his interview with Yahoo. He basically came out and said that he is all for the unity between everybody that is at conflict, but he still doesn't understand, and he doesn't like the kneeling during the national anthem because it's it's disrespectful to the flag. And it really shocked me that we got this comment from somebody like Drew Brees. Yes, I know Drew Brees is one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. We think of him, and he seems like an all-American guy, and you can see why, or no, I don't even see why, but you can understand his viewpoint because that's just the upbringing that he had. But especially you're seeing all of these comments come out. You're seeing teammates of his, namely Michael Thomas, come out and speak against Drew Brees. You're seeing former teammates, and especially Malcolm Jenkins. And we're seeing other players around the NFL come out and speak against what Drew Brees said, because the fact that the point behind the kneeling of the national anthem has never been about disrespecting the flag. And the one post that I wanted to bring up was Aaron Rodgers. And if you're going to put Drew Brees on a level with other quarterbacks, Aaron Rodgers is going to be one of those guys you're going to level up with him. And Aaron Rodgers put out a statement on Instagram. He said, "A few years ago, we were criticized for locking arms in solidarity before the game. It has never been about the anthem or the flag. Not then, not now. Listen with an open heart. Let's educate ourselves and then turn the word and thought into action." And I think that's it's a statement that I think is closest to the opinion that the protesters are trying to get out there. Your thoughts on what we've seen with these comments with Drew Brees and the responding comments from other people around the NFL. We'll start with Jared.
So I actually have a couple of the responses pulled up that I want to talk about. So the first one actually comes from LeBron James. Obviously, we know LeBron James is huge when it comes to, supporting the Black community. We know LeBron is a very outspoken advocate for a lot of things in this country, and he is consistently an icon that a lot of people look up to, and he is very well respected. And this was his comment. He goes, "Wow, man, is it still surprising at this point? Sure isn't. You literally still don't understand why Cap was kneeling on one knee. Has absolutely nothing to do with the disrespect of the flag and our soldiers, men and women who keep our land free. My father-in-law was one of those." When you have LeBron coming out, and then you have Richard Sherman, who he was saying Richard Sherman said, "He's beyond lost. Guarantee you there were Black men fighting alongside your grandfather, but this doesn't seem to be about that. That uncomfortable conversation you're trying to avoid by injecting military into conversation about brutality and equality is part of the problem." We have Josh Jacobs. Literally the only words he could muster were, "This ain't it," and he had the facepalm emoji. Devin and Jason McCourty, this is a disgrace. To speak about your grandfathers as if there weren't Black men fighting next to them. Those men later returned to a country that hated them. Don't avoid the issue and try to make it about a flag or the military. Fight like your grandfathers for what's right. And then Michael Thomas couldn't even say anything. He just put the sick emoji. Emmanuel Sanders, who just recently signed with them, shake my head, ignorant. we're seeing so many figureheads in the NFL who are taking a stand against Drew Brees. Now, as an NFL fan, as somebody who appreciates a very talented player, somebody who loves watching, a talented quarterback, Drew Brees is, like you said, Ryan, is obviously one of the best quarterbacks ever. But I agree. I mean, to be this ignorant to what is going on in this country and to be able to say that with that much conviction, to just say, yeah, but it disrespects the flag, is so absurd to me. And to bring it more to a football aspect, I think this is going to cause a huge, huge, huge rift in that Saints locker room. I don't know if this is one of those I don't think this is one of those situations where, they'll be able to go into the locker room and say, let's set aside our differences, go out there and win a football game. I don't think that's going to be it. I don't think that Drew Brees is going to be – I don't think he's going to be able to lead that team to more than maybe 5 wins this season, if that, because of this. I think the rift that is going to be in this locker room is really going to deteriorate that team. And I honestly wouldn't be surprised. I know there's been a lot of rumblings that after this year, Drew Brees is considering going into broadcasting. And I wouldn't be surprised if, we see those offers rescinded from him and if we don't see him anywhere near the football field.
Nate?
Yeah, so what Drew Brees has said is being taken slightly out of context, but is at the end of the day not okay. People are only focusing on what he has said about the kneeling, and they're not focusing on the fact that he still empathized with the killing of George Floyd and still sympathized with the Black Lives Matter movement. He still said all those things. He still said what happened to George Floyd cannot happen in this country. He still said these protesters have every right. He said one wrong thing and probably 10 right things, which is still not a good thing, because the one wrong thing is what's going to make the news headlines. And as a figurehead, as Drew Brees is, as a person who plays a sport that leads our country at a position that leads the sport, you can't say things that are going to provoke even any. If it provokes one teammate in your locker room, you shouldn't have said it. And regardless of whether I or you two or anybody agrees with what he said or disagrees with what he said, he should have stayed far clear from saying anything in that realm, just because of how it will affect that Saints locker room. And I'm talking about it strictly from a football standpoint here. His teammates are not going to like what he said. Michael Thomas has already been on record not liking what he said. Emmanuel Sanders already doesn't like what he said. And certainly a rift between quarterbacks and receivers is not a good thing for a football team. Certainly a rift between Demario Davis and Drew Brees, who play on opposite sides of the football, is not a good team. Do I think the Saints will still win 10-plus games this year? Yeah, probably. But I don't think that it's a good look for Drew Brees. I don't think it's a good look for the NFL. And I really wish Drew Brees would have steered far clear away from saying something like that.
Well, let me ask you a question, Nate. Out of curiosity for myself. So let's say, the season rolls around and this rift, this friction between, Drew Brees and the receivers or whoever. And, let's say it's Michael Thomas and he says, I don't want to play if Drew Brees is going to be on the field. I want Taysom Hill to throw me the ball. Who do you side with in that situation? Obviously, you're never going to discredit Drew Brees' talent as a quarterback. But if you're an organization and you choose Drew Brees, who made this comment, regardless of everything else he said, over Michael Thomas, who is considered to be one of the best receivers in the league, and then how does that make you look as a franchise, right? Or what if you choose Michael Thomas over Drew Brees? And then, how does that make you look? Like, the question is, I guess, how does the organization handle it going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the organization should put out a statement saying that they would have not taken either side. I think the organization should put out a statement saying that they would like to refrain from their players making such comments in the future as what Drew Brees made, and they should really walk on eggshells around the issue, because obviously the Saints are going to put out a statement, and probably already have before Drew Brees even spoke, saying something along the lines of how they empathize with George Floyd and the other victims, which are all the things that they're supposed to say, and are all the true things that they will say, and that everybody is thinking right now. But I don't think that it's in the best interest of the Saints organization or any other NFL organization to take the sides of specific ones of their players. And to your point about Michael Thomas saying that he's not going to play if Drew Brees is quarterbacking, I don't think that's a fair question, because I really don't think that's going to happen. Even if they don't get along to the point where they cannot stand to be in the same room as each other, they're both professional athletes who at the end of the day want to be on the football field, and they're not going to take those. They might take those differences out on the field with them, but they're not going to let it stop them from being on the field.
Fair point. And like I said, it was a totally hypothetical. I didn't know where maybe you stood on something like that.
Yeah, if I'm the team, I take neither side, because there's no you don't come out looking like a winner in either of those situations, no matter who you pick.
Yeah, so the Saints were one of my Super Bowl favorites. I'm after digesting everything that's happened today with Drew Brees' statement and the response from teammates and other players around the league, I'm not sure that the rift that's going to be in the locker room. Now, the one thing that they're going to have for them is they're not going to be together for a month and a half. Now, I'm not saying that everyone's in the locker room is going to forget about what he said, but it does allow them time to sort of talk things out, to figure out why he said what he said. Nate, you were absolutely right that a lot of the statements that he did make in this interview were along the lines of promoting unity and speaking against what happened to George Floyd. But it doesn't. When again, this goes back to the whole bad apple thing. This one particular statement is a bad apple statement, and it's going to be the one that everyone remembers. And I think that especially with someone like Michael Thomas is probably the reason Drew Brees decided to come back for this season. If he doesn't have someone who's probably the best wide receiver in the NFL, do you think that he's going to come back? I'm not so sure. But the fact is that this is still a real talented team with a shot to win the Super Bowl. And this is going to be, I think, a bigger rift in the locker room than a lot of people think. We did have one comment from fellow Backsports Page team member Tyrone Stallworth. He had commented, "If kneeling is disrespectful and rioting is wrong, how do we speak up for ourselves?" And this goes back to the point that we were sort of making earlier, where sure, we would love for all of these protests to be nonviolent and peaceful, but it's happened already and it hasn't worked. So Tyrone, want to thank you for commenting and for watching us here. The next football topic that I think is the inevitable one that we have to get into is Colin Kaepernick. Colin Kaepernick is. I was listening I was watching the NFL Network right before we went live, and there was a conversation that was going on with Richard Sherman, Chris Long, and someone else, And I believe it was Richard Sherman that had made the statement. I could be wrong, but he said the statement that Colin Kaepernick made by kneeling 4 years ago is just being heard now. And that was really powerful, because a lot of people just automatically decided to put down what Colin Kaepernick was doing, and he was eventually ridden out of the NFL. Now you're getting and there was one article that I had posted to my Twitter account, and it was about how right now is the time for a team, and especially the Minnesota Vikings, to go out and sign Colin Kaepernick. Now, I don't know what Colin Kaepernick's mindset is right now. I don't even know if he wants to play in the NFL right now. We haven't heard from him. We haven't heard what his desires are for the future. We know it wasn't long ago that he did express interest in still playing in the NFL, but it seemed like he wanted to come back as strictly a starter. Now, I don't know if that mindset has changed, but I don't think that any team is going to sign him to be a starter, because he's now out of the league 3 years. But I do think that it is imperative that one NFL team reaches out and tries to bring him into camp. I just don't want that gesture to be looked at as a saving grace. I want it to be out of merit, not to be out of, okay, well, this is what happened with George Floyd, and we see your reasoning behind it now, so we'll sign you. Jared.
So, as you know, Ryan, this topic, I actually, I don't know if I ever told you this. So, for one of my college communications courses, I wrote a 20-page research paper that involved the Colin Kaepernick protest. For me, I am 100% on Cap's side, and it is absolutely sickening to me what happened to him. You know, being blackballed by the NFL, not being able to sign with any team, anything along those lines, anything that happened to him negatively sickens me. People are constantly calling for peaceful protest, saying, why can't these rioters peacefully protest? Why can't this be resolved peacefully? Well, they tried that. Colin Kaepernick tried that. Eric Reid tried that. Eric Reid's still playing, but it took him a while. For me, it's, if Colin Kaepernick was to get signed, if I were him, I wouldn't want it. I would say no. I would reject any single offer that came my way if I was Colin Kaepernick. And the reason is like you said, it's going to be looked at as a publicity stunt. I'm going to just say this as an example of what we were just talking about with Drew Brees and the Saints. What happens if the Saints go out and sign him tomorrow as a backup? That is to cover their asses for, you know, the comment that Drew Brees made. And they're going to be like, look, we're not a bad organization. We brought in Colin Kaepernick. Yeah, okay, that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't change anything. That doesn't change the fact that he was demonized for kneeling down during a song. Not only that, it's just the first thing the NFL needs to do, and I don't care what team it is or who it is, as long as it is somebody from the NFL who is in a position of power, they need to issue him an apology. For Roger Goodell to go out there and, you know,
it has to be Goodell. I think it has to be Goodell.
Absolutely. And they just need to issue him an apology for how his situation was handled. Like I said, if I'm him, I don't go to a team. I don't reach out. I don't sign. Granted, you know, I'm not him. might still love the game of football. He might still be passionate about the game, and he might want to get back out there and play, whether it's as a backup, as a starter, whatever it might be. So sure, go ahead and take it. But if I'm him, I don't take it knowing that whatever team is signing me is most likely doing it as a publicity stunt.
Nate?
Yeah, see, I kind of disagree with you there, Jared. I think Kaepernick would love to play in the NFL again, and here's why. I think he would kind of want to stick it to the teams that didn't sign him all these years and kind of give a proverbial middle finger to the NFL, saying, "Look, here I am, good enough to play in the NFL, and you blackballed me for 3 years and kept me out of the league." What would be a better revenge? I hate the word revenge because it had such a negative connotation, but what would be better for Colin Kaepernick than to go play in an NFL football game and have everyone cheer for him after that would be great for him. That'd be great for the movement. That'd be great for everybody. So I think Kaepernick would be more than inclined to want to play in an NFL football game again. Now, will that happen? I don't think he's one of the 32 best quarterbacks in the league. He was borderline one of the 32 best quarterbacks 3 years ago when he was kicked out of the NFL. Well, he wasn't necessarily banned, but when he was blackballed out of the NFL, he was already a borderline non-starter at the moment. Like he had the one good year when he played when he took them to the Super Bowl and they lost to the Ravens in that game where the power went out. But that was like Kaepernick's shining moment as a quarterback. He's not like a Russell Wilson or a Lamar Jackson who's a top 5 quarterback in the league and has a legitimate case to be a starter. Like, I think he's one of the 64 best quarterbacks that should be a backup somewhere. But if he's going to say, I'll only take a starting role, that's going to be pretty hard for him to come by, especially after sitting out for 3 years and being a borderline starter as is before he left.
I mean, I guess we can agree to disagree. Personally, I think he would love to play in the NFL too. I was just saying that if I were him, if I was in his position, I wouldn't want to, looking at how it could be spun as, kind of just a media moment for whatever team does sign him. However, I am going to disagree with the fact that he may not be. I wouldn't even put him near the top 25 quarterbacks, but I could think of at least a handful of quarterbacks that he's probably better than. That's assuming he kept up with working out and
what team should he start for then?
The Chicago Bears.
They have Trubisky and Foles. I'd argue that Foles is at least better than Kaepernick. Foles won a Super Bowl.
I mean, sure, he won a Super Bowl. I don't know how I feel about that Super Bowl win, and I'm not even saying that as a Patriots fan. The last 8 games of that season, or 6, or however many games of that season there were, where Foles came in during the regular season, he only
played I think he only played the final 2. Because remember that year, Carson Wentz was going to be considered for the MVP by a lot of people.
Yeah, he was an MVP.
And I think it was week 14 that Carson Wentz got hurt.
Oh, I thought it was earlier from my memory banks, but
Foles was an over 63 or 64% career completion percentage, whereas Kaepernick was like high 50s at best. I mean, Foles is a decent downfield passer. There are definitely some you could coin toss it, but the Bears already have 2 borderline starting quarterbacks. They don't really need a third.
Fair. That's just my 2 cents on it. But while we are talking about Colin Kaepernick, I do have one thing that I want to bring up, and it is about the San Francisco 49ers organization. So yesterday, there was a movement between Twitter, Facebook, any form of social media called Blackout Tuesday. And the point of Blackout Tuesday was for someone to share a picture of just a black square, and they were going to use the hashtag Blackout Tuesday so that the information regarding Black Lives Matter, all the important information regarding where you can donate, the peaceful protests, any of that stuff could shine and could be much easier accessed. And the 49ers on Twitter changed their profile picture to the black square, and they used that hashtag. And from what I saw, they got a lot of negative feedback, not only from athletes, but from fans and stuff like that. For me, I was really, really annoyed with that, considering what happened to Colin Kaepernick. Considering that was where everything kind of started. And, all of a sudden, now he's blackballed from the NFL. Now the team wants to do that. To me, that just left a sour taste in my mouth.
Yeah, I mean, it basically screams hypocrisy. It was something that I think they had to do. Again, I'm I'm a fan of two teams with possibly the worst ownership in all of sports. Between the Wilpons owning the Mets and James Dolan as the head of the ownership group that owns the Rangers. He also owns the Knicks, but I'm not an NBA fan. But because of the fact that James Dolan has come out and said that the team won't release a statement regarding what's going on, that has left a sour taste in my mouth. So I think that not releasing a statement would be, for the 49ers fans, I think they were probably looking for that statement to come out. But it's the fans of the other teams, it's the media, and it's everyone else that is now, especially people that were NFL fans, and I know there are a lot out there that stopped watching the NFL after the whole Colin Kaepernick situation was going on. And they're now looking at the 49ers as being as hypocritical. Yeah, as hypocritical as you can be. And you know what? They deserve to be looked in that light, because they did not stand behind Colin Kaepernick when everything was going on. They refused to release statements. They refused to be a part of the narrative of the reason why Colin Kaepernick was kneeling during the national anthem. And now they're coming out and they're supporting the same group that was supporting Colin Kaepernick a couple years ago. I think you're going to see a lot of negative reaction towards the 49ers for quite some time. Nate?
Yeah, I agree with you. The 49ers really did not put themselves in a good position by going as heavy as they did into the support of the movement that's occurring right now. But that being said, if they didn't support it, if they didn't release any statements now, what would be
right?
They'd be getting negative feedback as well. They have to do something. I think they maybe put their foot on the gas a little too much and they overcompensated is what they did. They realized that they screwed up 3 or 4 years ago. Now they really tried to hammer home that they are for the movement, which I guess better late than never. But at the same time, it's not a good look for the organization. But what's an equally bad look for the organization is to not say anything. Like you said, with the Rangers and the Mets, then their ownership not putting out any statements is a bad look. So
the Mets did. The Rangers didn't, because they fall under the Dolan. But the Mets did. Yeah, I was just saying the Mets ownership, because of everything that's gone on the past 15 years and the whole Ponzi scheme and Madoff and their
but regardless,
don't get me started.
Yeah, regardless, the teams that are not making statements are under just as much scrutiny as the 49ers for being hypocritical. So really, the 49ers are going to be criticized either way in the situation. They kind of deserve to be.
And back to what you were saying, Ryan, and what kind of the point I was touching upon was people owing Colin Kaepernick an apology. I think that a lot more people would be satisfied if it came from two places, the 49ers organization and Roger Goodell. I think if anything, you just hear from those organizations that apologize to him and say, listen, we are sorry for everything that happened. We're sorry for how your situation was handled. Whatever they say, as long as it's an apology that gets their message across as saying, now we understand and now we're supporting you, I think that speaks miles for the,
Yeah, it'll go a long way.
the league.
I now a lot of people will come out and say too little, too late. But you're right. It's something like that absolutely needs to be done. And if I were Goodell, if I were the 49ers, I'd get onto that quickly. Now, to finish off my comments regarding this whole situation, and I remember going on social media, and I was actually I got into a heated discussion regarding this. I always stand for the national anthem. I stand for the national anthem when I'm watching a game at home and they're showing it. And people thought that I was weird for doing that. I don't know why, but that's just the way that I was brought up. But I also understand why the kneeling happened, and I didn't criticize. In fact, I helped bring to light why they were doing it. It's okay to have opinions and to be broad in your opinions, to be able to look at both sides of a situation and have things in common with both sides of each of the situations. So, yeah. So this is just something that, and I'm afraid that we're going to. Well, no. All right. I'm not. Strike that. Afraid isn't the word that I was going for. I absolutely believe that we are going to see kneeling during this year's NFL season, and I think it's going to just be just blown up to an enormous level of the amount of players that we are going to see kneel during this NFL season. And I know that the first couple games that Colin Kaepernick and whoever decided to follow in his footsteps, they were being shown on camera, and the NFL had a problem with that. And we started to see less and less of those players who were actually taking the knee being shown on camera during the national anthem. I'm afraid that the league is going to follow in that form. I think that there's a good chance that they're not going to show, even though I think they should, because it will bring light to the situation and help bring light to the fight that these players are trying to fight.
Absolutely. And even when people started kneeling, 3-4 years ago, I have to say I was shocked to see just how many players were supporting Colin Kaepernick. But and one thing I will say is, as a Patriots fan, when I turned on that game and I saw that whole team on that sideline kneeling down with their arms locked, including Tom Brady, that just, as a Patriots fan, gave me a lot of hope. I see constantly, a lot of people hate the Patriots. It's popular to hate the teams that win. Whatever. Oh, you think they cheated? Whatever. I see a lot of negative comments surrounding that team saying that they're outwardly racist, when that's in fact, I think, further from the truth. I've never seen anything like that. I've never seen anything of that nature come from that organization. In fact, I've seen the opposite. And I do agree, Ryan. I think that this upcoming season, we are going to see more teams kneeling than ever before. I think we're going to see more players. And I wouldn't be surprised if we started seeing some of the younger coaches participating as well. And I do want to bring up one more point about it is I don't understand how it got misconstrued as something offensive 4 years ago. The universal sign of sympathy is kneeling down. When someone on the opposing team gets hurt, I was always taught to kneel on one knee. When you're praying, whether it's Tim Tebow in the end zone or whatever, or when I used to go to baseball games all the time, Jason Varitek in the bullpen kneeling down before a game. It's a symbol of sympathy to pray and to be with, to make peace. And so for it to be misconstrued as something offensive is wildly beyond me. And like you said, I do think we are going to see a lot more of it.
Now, what are your thoughts on how many white players we're going to see kneel in support of their black teammates?
Well, that's a good question. And obviously, I would like to say, we're going to see everybody kneel in unity and we're going to see everybody agree. That's just never going to be the case, unfortunately. I think what we're going to see is a lot more people kneeling, and the white players who are kneeling with their brothers, I think, are going to be the white players who kneeled in the past. I don't know if maybe we'll see more white players kneel because they've learned or they've been brought into a different light. But I don't know if it's really going to change the number of players simply because I'll bring it back to Drew Brees. For example, he obviously never knelt during the anthem. He widely disregarded it. He thought it was offensive. So I don't think we're ever going to see him kneel. Alejandro Villanueva of the Steelers, he stood in the tunnel for the national anthem when the rest of the team kneeled down because he served this country.
Right.
Would I be surprised if I saw him kneeling with the rest of the team this year? Absolutely not.
I'd be shocked. I'd be shocked if Villanueva kneels.
I would be shocked if he knelt.
The Steelers are most likely going to handle the situation as they did in the past and either stay in the locker room or Mike Tomlin will have the team try and do something all at once. But at the end of the day, Villanueva is not going to kneel. He served 6 years as an Army Ranger. There's no way he kneels. I just don't think that's going to happen.
See, the reason I disagree with that is because, sure, he did serve, right? But we're seeing a country now where it's more than that, where you have the President of the United States saying that he's going to mobilize the military onto these peaceful protesters in countless different states if the governors don't do anything. So I don't think he's kneeling necessarily strictly to say Black Lives Matter, I'm supporting you guys. I think he's going to kneel down not only to support his teammates, but to fight against just the insane amount of, to fight just the everything going on in general. So that's why I don't think it would be surprising.
Yeah, it would surprise me if he knelt, only because I think the backlash that he would get from the Army community would be 10 times worse than the backlash he would be getting from his teammates if he stood. I don't think that his teammates would be offended by him standing. I think
I don't think
entire Army community would be disrespect or would feel disrespect if he knelt during.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of white players that did not kneel before start to kneel because the issue has been brought to a greater magnitude than it was before. 3 or 4 years ago when Kaepernick started all this, it was an issue, but people weren't rioting over it, and there wasn't as much of an uproar about it as what there is right now. And I think that having brought this to light is going to have those players more educated on the issue than they were before, and they're going to kneel. Not to say that the players who stand are uneducated, because they can still support the Black Lives Matter movement and be people who stand during the national anthem. For example, I still play football. Actually, I play collegiate football. And we don't usually go out for the national anthem. Actually, in college and high school football, it's customary for the teams to not come out of their locker room until after the national anthem is played.
Right.
But there are certain circumstances where teams will go out. Like, for example, in high school, we had one game where something had happened, and a soldier had died tragically or something from my area, and we went out and we held a flag at midfield, and the other team was out there as well. And I do suspect that this might be a situation where the NCAA decides that, hey, teams are going out for the national anthem. That way, black players do have the opportunity to kneel and things of that matter. But I personally will still stand for the national anthem. And I don't think that makes me in disrespect of the Black Lives Matter movement. I just think that it means I'm still standing for the national anthem.
Yeah, boys, this was a great discussion. We're going to have, until we actually have football on the field, we're going to have plenty of time to go over everything that's going on. But I definitely thought that this was an important time for us to have this discussion. And I thought it was a very positive one. I thought it was one that expressed true feelings. And we were able to sort of use our platform to get our viewpoints out there. And I know I feel better for having been able to talk about it. We are still living in a COVID-19 world. We're not able to go to the bar and BS about everything that's going on. We're in a Zoom world. That's how we're communicating. Everything is electronic, and you don't necessarily get to have the same type of conversation electronically that you would have if you were with some people that you know. But I thought that the conversation that we had tonight was as good as it gets. And I want to thank you boys for what we got done tonight.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having us on, Ryan. I thought it was an excellent episode as well.
Absolutely, Ryan, and I agree 100%. I do think it was nice to get our voices out there, and obviously we're not going to agree 100% on everything, but it's nice to be able to have a discussion where even if we're not agreeing 100%, or we are, where we're not attacking each other, because you see that far too much on social media right now. And I'll admit, I've let my feelings and my anger get the best of me, and I've said things I shouldn't have, and I'm sure we all have, especially regarding the situations at hand. So I think this was a great episode.
So everyone, make sure that you're subscribing on whatever podcast platform you're listening. We're on iTunes. We're on Spotify. We're on Google Podcasts. Make sure you're subscribed to Backsports Page. Got a great family of podcasts that we've been putting out. Again, make sure you're checking out backsportspage.com. Follow Backsports Page on all social media at Backsports Page. Jared's on Twitter at JournalistJ0. Nate is on Twitter at NateAngus8. And I'm on Twitter at rstern33. And the show is on Twitter at Zero Tech Pod. And we are now on Facebook as well. Make sure you check out on Facebook the Zero Technique Football Podcast. Guys, can't wait till we get to talk again next week. And everyone, thanks for tuning in.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ryan.